A rude customer challenged her at the counter. Hell's Angels stood by the shop owner. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. At 5:42, the wind came hard across the bypass and pushed the diner door open before every tired driver could get a hand on it. Sadie Rowan caught the door with her hip, slid a pot of coffee back from the counter's edge, and called, "Seat yourself anywhere clean. I'll be right with you," without losing the 3 orders already stacked in her head. The truck stop diner was not large, but on a shift change dusk it could feel like a station platform. Diesel jackets, road maps, wet boots, phones buzzing, men and women trying to eat before the next 100 miles. Usually Sadie could make that pressure look smaller than it was. She had owned Rowan's Bypass Diner for 2 years, long enough to know which booth stuck in cold weather, which regular wanted coffee before hello, and which grill ticket had been hanging too long by the pass window. Tonight, one server was home sick with a fever, and Sadie was running the counter, the register, the floor, and half the memory of the kitchen by herself. She did not rush like a person losing control. She moved like someone sorting a storm into separate tasks. 2 coffees to booth 3. Extra napkins to the couple under the map of county roads. Meatloaf held until the customer stopped changing seats. Chili plate up for booth 3, extra crackers. A duplicate ticket, splashed at one corner, with chili when the cook slid the bowl too fast, stayed pinned beside the pass window, where Sadie could see it every time she turned. She tapped it once, with the back of her knuckle, checking the order against the plate waiting under the lamp, then turned to catch the register before the line backed into the doorway. Rick Danner had come in 20 minutes earlier with a red face, a travel bag, and the sour looseness of a man who had found the bottom of a few bottles before finding dinner. He had started at the counter, asked about meatloaf and gravy, then moved to a 2-top, then waved off that seat because the vent blew cold on his neck. Sadie had noticed all of it, not because she was suspicious, but because running a diner meant noticing what people forgot about themselves. While she was taking payment from a driver with exact change, Rick slid into the booth marked 3, the same booth tied to the chili ticket already waiting at the pass. The cook called the number, and Sadie, catching the call through register noise, set the chili at the booth on the ticket before she realized Rick had changed seats again. By the time the room moved 3 tasks ahead, Rick stood halfway out of that booth with the plate in one hand and anger in the other. "This isn't what I ordered," he said, loud enough to stop the fork of a trucker in the booth behind him. Sadie turned from the register, receipt still between her fingers. "I'll check it for you." "Don't check it like I'm confused," Rick snapped. "I know what I said. You gave me this mess like I was supposed to be grateful for whatever you felt like throwing down." A few faces lifted. The line at the counter tightened. The cook's bell clicked once behind Sadie. Another plate ready, another minute slipping away. Sadie felt the room begin to choose speed over accuracy, the way rooms did when one loud person made truth feel inconvenient. She set the receipt beside the register, wiped one drop of coffee from her thumb, and looked at Rick without shrinking. "I'm not going to argue across the room," she said evenly, "but I am going to get it right." Rick gave a short laugh and lifted the plate higher, chili sliding toward the rim. "Little late for that, isn't it?" The trucker behind him glanced from Rick to the pass window, then down at the table, as if he had seen something he was not ready to name. Sadie saw that too. She also saw the chili-marked duplicate ticket still pinned in plain view, waiting beside the pass window, while the room grew louder around it. Sadie did not take the plate from Rick's hand. Not yet. A raised plate could become a dropped plate if a tired room leaned the wrong way, and she had learned long ago that control was sometimes just the distance between 2 people and a counter. She stayed where every customer could see her hands, her face, and the small space she left for Rick to lower his voice, if he chose to. "Tell me what you ordered," she said. "I already told you." Rick's words came out thick, pushed along by embarrassment as much as anger. Meatloaf. Potatoes. Gravy. Simple as sunrise. And you bring me chili like I can't read a menu. The cook's bell clicked again behind her. Someone at the counter shifted, trying not to look impatient and failing. A woman near the door checked her watch. The wind pressed dust against the front windows, and the room smelled of coffee, fryer oil, and the sharp bite of spilled chili. Sadie turned half a step, lifted one finger toward the pass window, without looking away from Rick, and called, "Hold that club sandwich 30 seconds. Then she looked back at the man with the plate. "I'm listening." Rick gave another laugh, louder this time, because the first one had earned him attention. "No, you're covering yourself. That's what you're doing." Owner makes a mistake, then acts like the customer's the problem. A few heads turned towards Sadie, with the uncomfortable curiosity people saved for public scenes they did not start, but did not want to miss. That was the dangerous part. Not Rick's volume by itself, not the wrong plate, not even the insult. It was how quickly a busy room could accept the first clean version of a messy story, especially when the person being blamed had 3 jobs in her hands and no spare witness standing beside her. Sadie felt the line at the register pause behind her. The longer this took, the colder the orders got. The faster she surrendered, the more the room would remember his version. She took one clean breath and set her towel flat on the counter. "Rick, I'll fix any order that needs fixing," she said. "But I won't agree to something I haven't checked." "There it is," Rick said, pointing with the edge of the plate. "You hear that? She's calling me a liar now." "I didn't say that. You dressed it up." The adult trucker in the booth behind Rick looked up again. He was a broad man in a gray work jacket, maybe late 40s, with a receipt tucked under his water glass, and a fork stopped above his own food. His eyes moved, from Rick's booth to the counter stools, then toward the pass window, where the chili-splashed duplicate ticket hung beneath the metal clip. He opened his mouth once, decided against it, and lowered his fork. Sadie noticed the hesitation. She also noticed the hot sauce bottle sitting on Rick's table, even though he had asked earlier if the counter had any. She filed the detail away without touching it. "Nobody needs to take sides," she said to the room, calm but firm enough to reach the back wall. "Food can be wrong. People can remember wrong. We're going to sort it, without making it bigger than it is." That should have cooled it. Instead, Rick heard the word remember and stiffened like she had slapped pride out of his hand. "I remember just fine," he said. "You people get busy and start tossing plates wherever. Then I'm supposed to sit here and eat whatever lands in front of me." A man at the counter muttered that some folks just wanted dinner. Another customer whispered for him to leave it alone. The room split into little pockets of discomfort, and every pocket made the truth harder to hear. Sadie could feel the diner slipping from service pressure into public judgment. She had 2 choices now: apologize for something she had not confirmed and move the line, or stop the room long enough to protect the plain facts. Before she could make that choice, the front door opened again. Cold wind swept in first. Then came the low sound of older men entering carefully, boots quiet on the worn floor, road jackets dark, with dust from the bypass. Their presence changed the air, but none of them moved toward Rick. None of them spoke over Sadie. They simply stepped inside like customers who understood that a room already under pressure did not need another shove. The first man through the door was Jonah Pike, 57, broad through the shoulders, but careful in the way he took up space. His hair was wind-flattened from the road, his beard silver at the jaw, and his eyes had the patient focus of someone who had spent years listening to emergencies become understandable one timestamp at a time. He paused on the mat, not because he was uncertain, but because he had already read enough of the room to know where not to stand. Behind him came several older riders in worn road jackets, all of them carrying the fatigue of dusk miles, and none of them carrying the need to perform. They did not fan out around Rick. They did not block the door. They did not crowd the counter. 2 stayed near the entry, with their hands loose at their sides. One moved toward the far end of the counter, and the others waited for Sadie to tell them where they could sit. "Evening," Jonas said, voice low enough that no one had to mistake it for a command. "Take whatever's open." Sadie looked from him to the room, then to Rick, who still held the plate like evidence in a trial he had invented while standing. "Booth 6 is clear. If you don't mind waiting on menus, she said. Kitchen's backed up. We can wait, Jonas said. He meant it simply, and somehow the words landed heavier than if he had raised his voice. A few customers settled back an inch. The man at the counter stopped muttering. Rick noticed the shift and hated it immediately. Great, he said, turning just enough to throw his words across the aisle. Now we need an audience for cold chili. Jonah did not look offended. He did not answer like a man taking bait. He looked at the plate, then at the pass window, then at the booths and counter stools, with the kind of quiet inventory that did not yet accuse anyone of anything. Sadie saw that look. It was not suspicion. It was sequence. Who was standing? Who had moved? What was hot? What had cooled? What came before what? That kind of seeing mattered in a diner, too. Sir, Jonas said to Rick, still calm. You trying to get your supper fixed, or trying to make sure everyone hears it was wrong? Rick blinked at him, caught between anger and the oddness of being asked a question instead of challenged. I'm trying to get what I paid for. Fair enough, Jonas said. Then the order matters. He left it there. No threat, no lecture, just a plain sentence that made the room notice the difference between being loud and being clear. Sadie took that opening, without handing him the scene. Rick, set the plate on the table, please. Not for me. So it doesn't spill. For a second, he looked as if he might refuse just because the request was reasonable. Then chili slid closer to the rim, and the trucker behind him leaned away from the possible mess. Rick lowered the plate with a sharp little clatter. Sadie did not flinch. Thank you. The riders went to booth 6 and sat without turning their chairs toward him. Jonah remained standing near the end of the counter, not in Rick's path, not between anyone and the exit. His attention moved once more to the ticket rail. The chili splash duplicate ticket hung there under its metal clip, half shadowed by the heat lamp. Sadie saw him see it, but he did not point. He waited, because the diner was hers. The accusation was hers to answer or not answer. And the next choice, the one that would decide whether the room kept rushing past the truth or finally slowed down enough to hear it, belonged to Sadie alone. Sadie looked at the plates waiting under the heat lamp, then at the people waiting behind the counter line, then at Rick's booth, where the chili plate now sat safely on the table. Every practical instinct in her told her to move fast. Replace the food, apologize broadly, get the register moving, keep the room fed, protect the night's receipts. That was how small businesses survived ordinary pressure. But there was another kind of cost, quieter and harder to count, and she could feel it already spreading through the diner. If she let Rick's version stand, because it was faster, then tomorrow the story would not be about a table change and a plate that followed the wrong seat. It would be about the young owner who threw food down wrong and got defensive when called on it. Sadie wiped both hands on her apron, not because they were dirty, but because she wanted them still. Give me 2 minutes, she called toward the pass window. Hold the hot plates back. The cook looked out from behind the stainless shelf, saw her face, and stopped ringing the bell. The room registered that before anyone said a word. Sadie stepped out from behind the counter, but not close enough to crowd Rick. Here's what we're going to do, she said. Nobody has to argue. Nobody has to guess. We're going to walk it back from the ticket. Rick sat back hard, trying to make the booth look like ground he had claimed. Walk what back? I ordered meatloaf. You gave me chili. That's the whole story. Maybe, Sadie said. Then it'll stay simple. She turned slightly, so the room could hear her, without feeling summoned. If you're waiting on food, I'm sorry for the pause. One person called out sick tonight, and I know everybody's tired. But I'm not sending another plate across this room until I know where this one came from. There was a stir at the counter, not quite complaint, not quite respect. A few customers looked toward the pass window. The chili splash duplicate ticket hung there under the clip, plain as a receipt on a windshield. Jonah saw the eyes moving and stayed quiet. He had not come there to take the floor. He only shifted his weight off the aisle, giving the nearest customer room to pass, if they needed to. One of the riders at booth 6 lowered his menu, and then placed it flat on the table, making no show of watching Rick. That small lack of performance helped more than a speech would have. The room did not feel surrounded. It felt held in place long enough to listen. Sadie reached the ticket rail and touched the edge of the chili-marked duplicate without pulling it free. Rick, When you came in, you sat at the counter first. Rick frowned. So, you asked about meatloaf and gravy there. Because I ordered meatloaf. I remember. Her voice stayed even. Then you moved to the two-top by the vent. Because it was cold. I remember that too. She looked toward the booth, where he sat now. Then you moved again, after the chili ticket had already been clipped for booth 3. Rick opened his mouth, but the words did not come out cleanly. The trucker behind him lifted his eyes. Sadie noticed, but she did not drag him in yet. A witness pushed too soon could retreat out of simple discomfort. I'm not asking anyone to take my side, she said. I'm asking for the order of things. Jonah, still at the end of the counter, spoke only then, and only to the room. Order helps. In dispatch, if 3 people talk at once, you don't get truth faster. You just get noise with confidence. It was not a command, and it was not aimed like a weapon. It gave people permission to be quiet, without feeling corrected. Rick's cheeks deepened in color. I know where I Saturday. Good, Sadie said. Then help me keep it straight. She picked up a clean pencil from beside the register and tapped the counter once, marking the first point in the air more than on paper. Counter stool, two-top by the vent. Booth 3. That part matters, because plates follow tickets, and tickets follow seats. The sentence changed the diner. Not dramatically, not with gasps, just enough. The impatient line stopped shifting. The trucker's fork went down. Rick looked at the chili plate, then at Sadie, then at the ticket rail, as if the ordinary objects around him had started keeping better memory than he had. Sadie did not write anything down yet. Writing too soon would make it look like she was building a case instead of finding the truth, and she knew the difference mattered. She stood with the pencil in her hand, the counter on one side of her, Rick's booth on the other, and the whole diner caught in the narrow space between impatience and attention. Counter stool first, she said, pointing with the eraser, not at Rick, but at the empty stool near the pie case. You had coffee there. Black. You asked if the meatloaf came with brown gravy or white. Rick's mouth tightened. Because I ordered meatloaf. You did, Sadie said. And I wrote it down. But I held the table number, because you were still moving. A few customers shifted, not restless this time, but listening harder. Rick glanced around, as if he expected the room to laugh for him, but no one did. Jonah remained near the end of the counter, hands resting loosely against the edge, eyes lowered to the path between the stool, the two-top, and Rick's booth. He looked less like a man judging, and more like a man following tire marks after rain. Then you moved to the two-top by the vent, Sadie continued. I brought you coffee there, because you said the stool was too close to the register line. So what? Rick said, people move. They do. Sadie nodded once. That's why I'm slowing it down. The trucker behind Rick cleared his throat softly, then stopped himself. Sadie saw the movement, but let it breathe. She stepped to the two-top by the vent. A paper napkin still sat there, folded under the edge of a menu to keep it from fluttering when the door opened. Beside it was an empty sugar packet and a ring of coffee, where Rick's cup had rested. You left this table before any dinner plate was handed to you, she said. Rick's eyes narrowed. I left because it was cold. I remember. She turned toward the booth, where he now sat. Then you took booth 3, while I was at the register. A woman near the wall looked from Rick to the pass window, then back down at her soup. Sadie did not call on her. She moved only when the facts moved. This booth already had hot sauce and crackers set near the napkin holder because the chili ticket was clipped before you sat down. Rick reached for the hot sauce bottle, then seemed to realize touching it would not help him. His hand dropped back beside the plate. What does sauce have to do with anything? Maybe nothing, Sadie said. Maybe it tells us which order the booth was already holding. The chili plate sat between them now, losing steam, its edge marked, with one smear, where Rick had carried it too high. It was an ordinary plate, heavy white ceramic, the kind Sadie had stacked 100 times before noon. But under the diner lights, with every impatient voice quieting around it, it had begun to look less like dinner and more like a clock, with the hands knocked loose. Behind Rick, the trucker finally lifted his head. Ma'am, he said, polite but uneasy. I saw him move into that booth after the chili was called. Rick turned fast. Nobody asked you. Jonah's eyes came up, but his voice stayed calm. He's answering her, not you. No threat sat inside the words. Just a boundary, clean enough that the room accepted it. Sadie looked at the trucker. Only say what you're sure of. The trucker nodded. I'm sure he moved after the call. I'm also sure the chili ticket was already hanging near the window before he sat there. Rick stared at him, then at Sadie, anger working harder now, because certainty had begun to fail him. Sadie looked once toward the pass window, where the chili splash duplicate ticket still hung under the clip. She did not pull it down yet, not until the room had followed every step and could see why it mattered. Sadie let the trucker's words settle before she moved. She did not rush toward the ticket rail like she had found a weapon, and she did not look at Rick like a man caught in a trap. She simply walked back to the pass window, reached up, and unclipped the duplicate ticket, with the chili stain dried along one corner. The paper had been there the whole time, half under the heat lamp, plain enough for anyone to have ignored. She held it by the clean edge and turned so the counter, the booths, and Rick could see it. This is the copy from the kitchen side, she said. It stays here after an order is called, so we can check what moved and what still needs to move. Rick folded his arms, but his eyes stayed on the paper. That doesn't prove you didn't mess it up. Not by itself, Sadie said. That's why we're not using it by itself. She crossed to the counter stool near the pie case and pointed with the pencil again. You sat here first. Coffee. Meatloaf question. Meatloaf order written. Table not confirmed, because you moved before I could mark the final seat. She moved to the two top by the vent, leaving space between herself and Rick at every step. Then here. Same coffee cup. Cold air from the door. You asked for hot sauce while you were still at this table, but this table didn't have any. The adult trucker nodded once, small but certain. Rick saw it and looked away. Sadie continued to the booth, where the chili plate sat. Then here. Booth 3. And this ticket was already clipped for booth 3 before you sat down. She turned the duplicate ticket toward the light. Chili plate. Extra crackers. Booth 3. The cook behind the pass window leaned into view just enough to say, that ticket was called before the table change, then disappeared again, careful not to make himself the center. Sadie did not need more than that. She looked at the table. This booth had hot sauce and crackers already waiting near the napkin holder. That matched the chili ticket. Your meatloaf ticket was separate. It was delayed because your seat changed twice before I confirmed where to send it. The room followed her eyes. Counter stool, two top, booth, plate, ticket, bottle, crackers tucked beside the rim, where Rick had not noticed them. The facts did not arrive like a dramatic confession. They arrived like small items placed back in the right drawer. Jonah said nothing. One of the riders at booth 6 took a slow sip of water and kept his eyes on the tabletop. Their quiet was not pressure. It was a space where people could admit what they had seen without being pulled into a fight. Sadie looked to the trucker. You said the chili was called before he moved. Are you sure? The trucker rubbed one hand over his jaw. Yes, ma'am. I looked up because I heard chili and crackers. Then he slid into the booth while you were ringing someone out. Sadie nodded and turned back to Rick. Your meatloaf was never lost. The mistake was a seat crossing a ticket, not me deciding what you deserved. The delay is mine to fix. The accusation is not. Rick's mouth opened, then closed around nothing steady enough to say. He looked at the ticket in her hand, the hot sauce bottle, the crackers, the booth beneath him, and finally the faces around the diner. No one was glaring. No one was cheering. That made it harder for him, not easier, because there was no enemy left to push against. The room had simply stopped believing the version he had shouted into it. Sadie lowered the duplicate ticket and kept her voice level. Now we know what happened, she said. The next part is what we choose to do with it. For a moment, nobody moved. The diner had the strange quiet of a place that had not become peaceful yet, only honest. Rick sat with his shoulders high and his eyes lowered toward the chili plate, as if the crackers tucked beside it had personally betrayed him. Sadie understood the temptation in that silence. She could sharpen it. She could make him repeat what he had said. She could let every tired driver in the room remember him as the man who shouted first and understood last. But that was not authority. That was just another kind of noise. She set the duplicate ticket on the counter where it would stay visible and slid the pencil beside it. "Rick," she said, "your meatloaf is still in the kitchen queue. The table change delayed it, and I'll fix that." Rick looked up, surprised by the part she accepted. "So you admit." "I admit the room got busy, and I should have confirmed the final seat before anything crossed the window," Sadie said. "I do not admit that I threw the wrong food at you, and I do not accept being called careless in front of my customers for something. That did not happen." The line at the register stayed quiet. Not frozen, just listening. Sadie turned toward the pass window. "Fresh meatloaf for Rick. Potatoes, brown gravy. On it," the cook called, and this time the sound of his pan moving felt like the diner breathing again. Rick rubbed his palm over his mouth, searching for the anger that had carried him this far. It did not hold the same weight now. "I didn't ask for special treatment," he muttered. "You're not getting it," Sadie said. "You're getting the meal you ordered. Same as anybody." She picked up the chili plate with a side towel and held it level. "And this one gets cleared and remade through the proper ticket flow because it sat too long during the confusion." The adult trucker behind Rick lifted a hand slightly. "My order can wait too, ma'am." Sadie looked at him, grateful but still businesslike. "Thank you for speaking only to what you saw." The trucker nodded once, the kind of nod that did not ask to be praised. At booth 6, Jonah Pike closed his menu and placed it neatly beside the napkin dispenser. "When you get a second," he said, "coffee's fine for us." "No hurry." His riders stayed easy in their seats, eyes on menus, water glasses, the wall clock, anything except Rick's embarrassment. That restraint did more than any defense could have. It let Sadie's correction remain hers. Rick shifted in the booth. "I was loud," he said finally, not quite an apology, not quite an excuse. Sadie took it for what it was worth and no more. "You were," she said, "and you can stay and eat if you can keep it respectful. If not, I'll box the order when it's ready, and you can take it with you." There was no threat in her voice, just a rule, a clean line across the counter. Rick looked toward the door, then back at the room, and maybe for the first time he realized no one was holding him there. No one had trapped him. No one had made him small. He had room to choose what kind of man he wanted to be after being wrong. "I'll sit," he said. Sadie gave a small nod. "Then I'll bring your plate when it's ready." She carried the chili back to the pass window, clipped the duplicate ticket beside the rail again, and reached for the waiting coffee pot. The diner started moving in pieces. A chair leg scraped softly. Someone unfolded a napkin. The register line loosened, and the cook called another order, without ringing the bell too hard. Sadie poured coffee for the first customer in line, then for the riders at booth 6, and only after the cups were filled did she look once toward the ticket rail. The stained paper was still there, but the room no longer belonged to the accusation pinned around it. It belonged to the woman who had slowed everything down and decided what fairness would sound like. The diner did not snap back all at once. It returned by inches, the way a room returns after a hard sound fades, but everybody still remembers where it came from. Sadie poured coffee at booth 6 first, because the riders had asked for the least and waited the longest, and because service, once restored, had to be fair in the order it found itself. Jonah accepted his cup with both hands around the mug, not ceremonially, not like he was blessing anything, just like an older roadman grateful for heat after wind. "Appreciate it," he said. "You'll get menus in a minute," Sadie told him. "No rush," Jonah said again, and this time a driver at the counter gave a small breath that almost became a laugh, the harmless kind people use when pressure finally releases. Sadie moved down the line. Coffee, check. Refill, check. 2 waters with lemon. A side of toast the cook had nearly forgotten, but Sadie had not. The register began to work again, bills sliding under the drawer clip, coins dropping into their slots, the small machinery of ordinary business proving that the night had not broken. Rick sat quietly in his booth, while his meatloaf cooked, hands folded around a glass of water he had barely touched. No one stared at him now, which was a mercy Sadie had chosen on purpose. The adult trucker behind him shifted his receipt out from under his water glass and stood when Sadie passed. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice low enough not to restart the scene. "I should have said something sooner." Sadie paused, with the coffee pot in her hand. "You said it when you were sure." He looked toward Rick, then back at her. Still, room got loud. Rooms do that, Sadie said. People can help them quiet down. The trucker nodded, left payment on the table, and placed the hot sauce bottle exactly where it had been, a tiny correction no one else would have noticed if Sadie had not spent 2 years noticing the language of objects. At the counter, the man who had muttered earlier pushed his empty plate toward the bus bin instead of leaving it for her. The woman near the door took her gloves off and stayed for pie instead of leaving. A couple at the wall booth waved Sadie over only to say they were fine waiting. None of it was applause. None of it made a speech out of her. That was why it mattered. Respect in a roadside diner did not always arrive as praise. Sometimes it arrived as patience, as a clean table edge, as a customer deciding not to make the next demand sound urgent. The cook slid the remade chili plate into the window, then the meatloaf, potatoes, and brown gravy on a fresh white plate. Sadie checked both against the tickets before touching either one. She sent the remade chili back out through the proper ticket flow, then brought the meatloaf to Rick. "Here you go," she said. "This is yours." Rick looked at the plate, then at her. The anger had drained out of him and left a tired man with too much pride and too little balance. "Thanks," he said, rough and small. Sadie did not make him say more. "You're welcome." As she turned away, Jonah lifted his mug just slightly, not a toast, not a signal to the room, only an acknowledgement she could take or leave. Sadie saw it and kept walking because the diner still needed her. But when she passed the ticket rail, she noticed the chili splash duplicate still clipped beside the window, no longer an accusation, no longer even proof. Just paper, stain, and sequence. For the first time all evening, the room was moving at her pace again. By the time the first dark stretch of evening settled beyond the diner windows, Rowan's bypass had found its old sound again. Tires hissed on the frontage road. The coffee machine clicked and breathed. The cook called orders in a lower voice, careful now with every plate that crossed the pass window. Sadie kept moving, but the movement had changed. Earlier, the room had pulled at her from every side, each voice trying to become the most urgent thing in her hands. Now the work came back to her in order. Refill the trucker's coffee. Drop the check at booth 3. Bring pie to the woman who had decided to stay. Slide a takeout box to the counter for a driver headed west before the weather turned worse. Rick ate slowly, eyes mostly on his plate. He did not become graceful all at once, and Sadie did not need him to. Near the end, when she passed, with the coffee pot, he touched 2 fingers to the edge of his water glass and said, "Meal's right." It was not a full apology. It was not clean enough to erase what he had shouted, but it was a step back toward ordinary decency, and Sadie understood that some people could only walk that far in public. "Good," she said. "That's what it should have been." She did not soften the boundary. She did not harden it either. Jonah Pike and the other riders finished their coffee without turning the night into a story about themselves. They paid at the register like anybody else, waited for their change, and left the booth cleaner than they had found it. Jonah paused only once near the counter, his road jacket dusty at the shoulders, his face lined by wind and years of listening before speaking. "You run a steady room," he said. Sadie looked past him for a moment at the ticket rail, where the chili splash duplicate still hung under the clip. "Some nights it has to be steadier than it wants to be." Jonah nodded, accepting the answer, without adding wisdom to it. "That's usually when it counts." Then he stepped out, into the wind, with the others, no ceremony, no backward glance meant to collect gratitude. The door closed behind them, and the diner kept going. What stayed with Sadie was not rescue, not spectacle, and not the silence of a frightened room. It was the smaller discipline of people choosing not to rush past the truth. She waited until the last rush plate was cleared before she unclipped the duplicate ticket. The chili stain had dried into the corner, dark and uneven, a mark that had almost become a lie because the room had moved too fast around it. Sadie smoothed the paper once on the counter, then folded it and set it beside the register, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A diner could not stop every mistake. A person could not keep every tired customer kind, but she could decide what happened when noise tried to outrun facts. She could slow the room. She could name the order of things. She could correct a plate without surrendering her own name at the counter. Outside, the rider's engines faded toward the bypass, low and distant under the wind. Inside, Sadie wiped the counter clean, lifted the coffee pot, and asked the next customer what they needed. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This story is not affiliated with or endorsed by any real motorcycle club or organization.